Hey, how you doing, everybody?
Howdy,
Welcome,
all.
welcome to X-Oriente. I'm your host, Eric Diamond, and this is the other host.
Jason Van Dyke. Hi, how are you?
Hi. So today we're going to talk a little bit today about anti-intellectualism, and I wanted to kind of cover this as a show. I mean, this is something that we talk about. We've talked about a lot on X-Oriente, kind of as a as a going concern, as a thing, because we've been a big advocate for critical thinking. But I had an experience last weekend where I was conversing with a lodge brother of mine over Facebook. It was a thread on our one of our brothers posted something that was not terribly flattering to our current president, and basically it was kind of like mayhem ensued. But what was disturbing to me not was that it got political, which happens. I mean, people have opinions, but that the lack of thinking, the lack, like this kind of fist in the air, America, blank yeah kind of attitude. Um, it really kind of bothered me. Like I don't know, man. Have you ever had that kind of experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the time. And I think that social media is probably one of the best places to experience that. That feeling of, oh my God, they're out to get me. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Facebook, actually all social media for the most part, tends to foster that particular brand of jingoism, I guess is the best word for it. But you can say outrageous things, and saying outrageous things gets you attention. It gets you conversation starters, things like that. But it's the internet. It's the wild, wild west. So, but I mean, yeah, and I feel the same way. It bugs me the exact same way it bugs you,
Yeah,
because it just feels you feel dirty afterwards.
I did kind of feel dirty afterwards, and
Right.
and typically what I do, like people who've been in converse, and then I had like another little sort of dust up with someone who I'm not going to reveal his name, but he is a well known Mason, about the idea that you know Muslims were the source and cause of terrorism, which I thought was I was like, wow, really, really. And so I was feeling kind of uncomfortable about this, because I thought, in a lot of cases, what people are doing is they're finding sources that are confirming their own beliefs, which is sort of the essence of what fake news is.
Hmm.
And then what I was finding was that they were finding this sort of evidence that really they were presenting in their arguments without any sort of critical thinking whatsoever. And then the next day, like it just left me with kind of a like I kind of thought we were better than this.
Right. Right.
And then the next day I was driving into work, and I listened occasionally to On the Media, which is
Hmm.
a NPR podcast, which generally has a somewhat, I would say, liberal bias. But it's here. I mean, here's the thing about news sources: every news source has a bias. You just got to know what it is, and sort of in your mind compensate for it. But this particular one it was a sort of what On the Media does is they have their long show, which is the one that they broadcast on NPR. It's about 50
Hmm.
minutes, and then they do throughout the week they do shorter ones of about 15 to 25 minutes. And this one was about anti-intellectualism, and they talked to somebody who had written a book on anti-intellectualism, and what he said, which was very interesting to me, is that anti-intellectualism is as old as the U.S. And one of the authors of one of the books that they cited was talking about how, if you think about it, like the idea of the pilgrims, right? So what they said was that the pilgrims really didn't come to this country seeking religious freedom. They were escaping religious freedom for a place where they could kind of impose their own religious, totalitarianism on the society that they wanted to build. And that lasted for several years, and resulted in some very famous witch trials and things like that. And then eventually, like, as more people came in, it became harder and harder to maintain. But the point is that this phenomenon of anti-intellectualism was as old as the U.S. and I kind of wanted to understand a little bit more about that, and I found a really interesting book, which I will see what I just got it here on my Kindle. Just got to wake up my Kindle. And it's called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life by Richard Hofstadter.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about this book, and I'm about nearly finished with it, but what's interesting about this book is that it was written in 1964. Now, I was born in 1964, so because I am somewhat long in the tooth, this book is long in the tooth. But when you read this book, it doesn't seem long in the tooth at all. And so what Hofstadter was writing about was he was doing kind of a reaction to the McCarthy era. And sort of the anti-communist fervor that was sweeping the country. And we were starting to kind of basically come out of that and start to deconstruct something of that. And so that's primarily what he was writing about. But when you read about it, it doesn't, you could substitute, communism for war on terror, and it's
right. Absolutely.
It's pretty current. And so I read this book, and then I started reading Brooke Gladstone's book. Brooke Gladstone is the host of On the Media, and she writes with a little bit more of a snarky, sarcastic tone. And I'm only about a third of the way into that book, so I don't know that I could recommend it, but I definitely recommend Hofstadter's book. I think it's a really amazing sort of piece, and Hofstadter's a sociologist, and so he's sort of looking at it from an academic perspective and saying, kind of here's what's going on. But I guess my first question for you, Jason, is have you experienced anti-intellectualism in your world? I mean, you work in Masonry. You're a professional Mason, as it were. Have you experienced that, and what form does it take?
It's a good question. Yes and no. I think the yes part of that answer is, when I worked with the Scottish Rite, it was really important that we would develop these kind of nationwide programs and things like that. And so it's important that you get buy-in from your local areas, because the way that the Scottish Rite is run is it's kind of like how the United States government works, where you've got kind of governors of the states, and they're semi-autonomous, but that there's a kind of an overarching federal government. It's that old marble cake idea. And so you really did need to get support. So if you develop this national program, you need to get the support of the local areas and to make those things work. Well, the GC used to always say, be careful, because you don't want to go in there saying, hi, I'm here from Washington. I'm here to help. Because that's not right. You're not any better than anybody else. These people have different life experiences, things like that. And it's a subtle form of anti-intellectualism, I guess. You know what I'm saying? Because it says you might want to tone that down. You know, don't be you. For this part, let's not be you. How about that? And so I mean, I have experienced that, and what's funny about that one is that there is some wisdom in that, right? Because you're going out and you're essentially selling. So you know, you do your best to get the best result at the end. Um, so I think I've seen it there. I've seen it other places as well, where you know I've been accused of overthinking issues and things like that. Um, but you know, I think that anti-intellectualism in itself is it, it's a reaction, right? It's a reactionary thing, and it's a reaction to power, more likely, right? Because um, educating yourself, bettering yourself in that way, trying to make yourself smarter, learning something, necessarily leads to you become a leader, right? It leads to power in itself. And those who don't have that, whether because they don't have the means to get it, or they just choose not to, um, you know, they react against it in a way, because you know, you always have to have an us versus them in something, right? And so I think that I think that it's just another way of us versus them. It's you got to have a bad guy so that you're the good guy. um, so yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I I've been a part of it, but God, I really hate it. You know, let me give you an example of just something that's happened to me recently. So there's actually another book worth talking about called "What's the Matter with Kansas," and it's sort of the same idea, and it's a book that was written by Thomas Frank is the guy, and Frank talks about what the title of the book is alluding to is why does Kansas vote, um, you know, mostly Republican, right? It goes conservative, but that's not in its best interest. Its self-interest would be to vote, you know, Dem or liberal Dem. So what accounts for that? You
Wait,
know,
why does he say that? Like, what's his basis for that?
what do you mean, like what the specific issues are that are
Well, I mean,
against
like,
their?
so we say, well, you know, you should vote Dem because it's in your best interest. Well, what makes that true?
Okay,
Like, because I'm sure there are a lot of Republicans listening to this who are going, "What do you
sure.
mean?" You know?
Well, right. Well, but you know what's interesting about this is that you can take the ideas of what's the matter with Kansas, and you can actually you can apply them to the other way around as well. If you're voting against your self interest, why are you doing that? You know, and the answer, his answer, although it is much longer, but it boils down to, you know, it's aspirational part of it. You know, they're voting in an aspirational way, saying, "Listen, I will, you know, I'll vote big business. I will vote these issues, even though I know that directly hurts my bottom line. But one day, I might be that guy, and I'd want that. You know, I'd want all that for me."
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, but there's a good dose of anti-intellectualism in there, which is that you know, these people, you know, the marketing there is, if you're conservative, you're salt of the earth. You know, you haven't lost, you know, you haven't lost your way. You know, through all these temptations of modern society, you are still God fearing, and you know, and so that's part of that. And it's you're you're thinking a lot about, you know, you're thinking too much about stuff. Well, you don't have to. Remember, you know, the truths are very, very simple. And so that's the intellectualism there, which is, don't, you know, all your fancy book learning from the East Coast and things like that. You know, we don't need you telling us how to do things here. You know, we're just simple folk. And so it's a narrative, right?
It is a narrative, and you know, so I thought it would be really good at this point to sort of help. We should define what we mean when we say intellectual, and so the difference between intelligence and intellectual. Correct. Because there is a according Absolutely. To Hofstadter, there is a difference, and he says intellect is the critical, creative, and contemplative side of the mind, whereas intelligence seeks to grasp, manipulate, reorder, adjust. Intellect examines, ponders, wonders, theorizes, criticizes, imagines. Intelligence will seize the immediate meaning in a situation and evaluate it. Intellect evaluates the evaluations and looks for the meanings of situations as a whole. Intelligence can be praised as a quality in animals, but intellect, being a unique manifestation of human dignity, is both praised and assailed as a quality in men.
Yeah. That's great.
Right? So the idea is that, like, you know, you can be intelligent, right? Which is mm-hmm. sort of that idea of, you know, common sense or, mm-hmm. you know, grasping a situation. Mm-hmm. But what intellect does is intellect starts to question the conclusions that you come to through intelligence. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he talks about is this idea of like what makes intellectual, like, so there's this balance he talks about in intellectualism between this idea of piety and playfulness, right? So mm-hmm. piety is basically like taking a particular situation seriously, right? So Lord knows there's a lot of serious issues that are confronting us as a society right now, right? And an intelligent person takes those issues seriously and seriously considers them. But then he adds this idea of playfulness to intellectualism, right? And the idea is that intellectualism has a balance of piety and playfulness. So the idea of playfulness is basically just questioning, right? So for example, in Hofstadter's time in 1964, right, we were all worried about communism, and communism was the scourge. An intellectual would say, what's so terrible about communism? Not as a way of just sort of like being necessarily contrarian, but just to sort of say, let's examine these conclusions that we're coming to. I mean, we're as a society choosing to reject this ideology as everything that's evil in the world. What is it that we're actually rejecting, right? And so mm-hmm. the intellectual is able to take some of those ideas and start to play with them a little bit and start to challenge them a little bit and say, well, all right, well, is it really so terrible to be a communist? You know, and in certain ways, yes. Right.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
And so if you go too far into the direction of piety, right, you end up in this place that they call sanctimony, right, where you become sanctimonious. And if you delve too far into the realm of playfulness, right, you become a contrarian, right? So for example, a perfect example of someone who is too playful in terms of the intellect is, I think, Bill Maher. Bill Maher is mm-hmm. a really good example of somebody who's, you know, smart and funny, but definitely pushes the envelope too far mm-hmm. on a regular basis. And that's his job. I mean, that's what he does. And right. he would acknowledge, in fact, he's caught in a scandal right now where he used the N-word inappropriately, and right. he did it to kind of, again, to sort of push that idea of playfulness in a place where people mm-hmm. felt very uncomfortable going. And so he kind of suffers the consequence. Mm-hmm. And so, the 19th, so in America, like the 19th century ideas of education saw eminent men become successful despite a lack of schooling. And, so you had, guys like Carnegie who had very little formal education, mm-hmm. Become crazy wealthy, crazy successful. And advanced education was then at that point seen not to was seen it was seen in the 19th century not as a way to cultivate certain aspects of the mind, but to make personal advancement possible. It was seen as a way, like education was seen as a way for social mobility.
Right. Exactly.
And so in America, and what's interesting is that this didn't really happen in Europe, because the culture of intellectualism had several hundred years, starting in the Renaissance and the rise of universities, just sort of grow. And so by the time the French Revolution happens, intellectualism is in full swing, and that's why sometimes you get those like weird excesses of European craziness in terms of revolution, but in America, intellectual and cultural pursuits were seen up until pretty recently, up until like the early part of the 20th century, as being like sort of they were sort of seen as unworldly, unmasculine, and impractical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what used to be, sort of this, so he says in the book, what used to be a jocular and usually benign ridicule of intellect and formal training has turned into a malign resentment of the intellectual and his capacity as an expert. And that reminded me of, keep in mind, he's writing this in 1964.
Right.
Now it's 1980, and Ronald Reagan stands up in front of America and says, the most terrifying 8 words in the English language were, "I'm here from the government and I'm here to help."
Right.
And that set off this whereas people were having doubts, I think, about the institutions that of government and of the institutions that were sort of keeping our society aloft. This kind of started the slide to the attempt, I think, at which we have today of completely dismantling those in favor of the individual with common sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder about that. I wonder if
well, it's a powerful thought, right? It's a powerful thought because for a couple of reasons. One, like you mentioned, in especially in the United States, you look at university not as a way to better yourself as a person, because that's something that you want to do for society in general, but it was seen as kind of the doorway into either a better class of living, or at very least just more money, so that you could become more successful financially. And what's funny is that there's that Horatio Alger thing that we have in America, which is pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't need anything other than your wits about you and a good idea, and you'll be a millionaire, by golly. And it's all just stick-to-itiveness and understanding it, just not taking any help from anybody. You got to do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a seductive story, but the truth is that it's happened to, I don't know, a handful of guys, but those handful of guys that it's happened to have become fabulously wealthy and powerful. Bill Gates is a perfect example of that. The guy dropped out of Harvard, thought school was just a waste of his time, but he's an exceptional human being, right? So I think that I think it's difficult to sell the idea that you go to college to exercise your mind, to learn how to think in a new way. If positive things happen from that, great. But what you're here to do is to exercise your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tough sell. They're not going to sell a lot of tickets to that. But if they say, hey, you come to this and I'll make you a whole, dirt bushel load of money afterwards, that's going to sell. That now it's practical. Now I get it. Now I know why I want to do this. So in the United States, I think that lure to anti-intellectualism, it's comforting, right? You know, in the 1940s and 50s, immediately post-war, you've got incredibly good manufacturing jobs, and those jobs are, they're not intellectually challenging, but they're good jobs. They pay well. They allow um, they allow families to purchase homes and cars, and live a generally middle class existence, um, without having to go to school,
Mm-hmm.
without having to take too much trouble to improve themselves. They just had to show up, and if you hit the button, at the right times, you're going to be fine, and we'll pay a bunch of money for it. And that's a result of kind of right place, right time stuff. Also a result of having really strong unions at the time, um, who did a very good job of collectively bargaining. Um, and we hadn't seen yet the cult of the CEO, which didn't come about in this country at least until the late 70s, early 80s, where those guys became, just fabulously wealthy and paid, hundreds of times what their workers were paid.
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh, when you look back on the quote unquote, the good old days, right? You didn't have to be an intellectual to be successful. And today, in an information age, you do have to be an intellectual to be successful, period. Whether you go to college for that or not, it doesn't really matter, but you need to develop that skill of intellectualism. You have to be able to think, um, and you need to be able to reason and to problem solve. Um, and I think that's I think it's really tough for people. It's really, really difficult.
That's interesting. So why do you say that? It's a really interesting idea.
Because I think
We
it's
have
really
to become
difficult.
intellectual.
Yeah, you absolutely do. In this society, absolutely. You're going nowhere if you're not. Because we are in the information age, and information is useless by itself, but intellectually, right? So using your intellectualism, you're able to take that information, compare it, contrast it, measure it. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do with information that actually makes information incredibly valuable as a resource. But again, if you don't apply those things to it, and if you don't know how to apply those processes to it, it's useless. It just is. It does nothing by itself. So I think that I think that's a difficult thing, because the process of intellectualization. You're welcome. Intellectualization. That the means to be an intellectual is a difficult undertaking, right? It's tough to do that stuff. It takes effort. It's like saying, well, I want to run a marathon. All right, you can't just run a marathon. There might be some people out there that can. Certainly, there are unbelievably gifted people who, if they wanted to, would just stand up and go, you know what, marathon today, and they could do it. But for 99.9% of human beings, you have to really work to get to that point of actually running a marathon. Regardless of time or anything like that, you're maybe not going to win it, but just even to go out there and complete a marathon running takes work.
Mm-hmm.
It takes practice. It takes dedication. It takes knowledge. You have to understand how to eat, how to rest between your workouts, things like that. You have to understand the changes that your body will go through. as it prepares to do something that's physically grueling and frankly probably not right to do. you know and so I mean, I think about it kind of in those terms, right? Is that intellectualism is a lot like that. You can't just jump into that pool. You have to prepare. You have to work on that. You have to understand, and you really have to think about those things. And it's hard. It is really hard. And a lot of times, for most people, it's not intuitive, right? And
well,
so
certainly it's not intuitive.
Right.
Because if it were, we call it common sense, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think that that's part of the problem there, is that, and the reaction against it, that anti-intellectualism, is I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to work at this. Why can't I just take my factory job? Why can't I just have that thing that I wanted, where I could push that button every few minutes, whatever, and I could have a nice life, and everybody would just leave me alone. I'd leave you alone. Just give me the button back. Give me the button.
I'm not sure about that. And the reason I question that, aside from being an intellectual, is that this goes back to this.
That's very meta. Good job.
Thank you. Very, very. Is because it goes back to even before, to pre-industrial times. And one of the things that Hofstadter, he makes an interesting distinction in his book between two kinds of intellectuals. One is the sort of the specialist intellectual. And of that, he says, once the intellectual was gently ridiculed because he was not needed, right? And if you think about the early days of America, that was true. I mean, we were an agrarian society.
Oh, sure.
We lived in villages.
Sure.
We were mostly Protestant, and what he says is that that's the nature of the root of anti-intellectualism, is that we started from this idyllic, homogeneous, agrarian, rhythmic, very understandable society, and we were kind of thrust by the early 20th century. The Civil War kind of threw us for a loop, and then afterward, we rapidly industrialized, got to a point where we were thrust into the world stage, to the point where we could no longer just sort of live that sort of agrarian, village-centric, Protestant-centric life. We were awash in immigrants. We were awash in, Jews and Catholics and Russians and, all kinds of stuff. And so he says, once the intellectual was gently ridiculed because he was not needed, now he is fiercely resented because he's needed too much.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly my point. And I'll go back a little bit further, Eric, is because that the intellectual was kind of gently ridiculed because he was not needed, right? Let's go back further. Let's go back into, even into the Age of Enlightenment, right? Where you see the rise of universities and things like that. They're not needed. Those men of, quote unquote, the men of learning, they weren't needed. They were a luxury. That was what you did when you had too much money and time on your hands. The work was done by other people, not you. And so you're ridiculed because, well, what else are you going to do with your time? Right. And so, I totally buy that. I think that's right on point. And now intellectuals are needed. They absolutely are needed, and they're vital to our economy. And yeah, like I said, just shut up and give me my job back. My button. Why can't I have a good middle class existence, without that?
Well, I think the root of that is ambiguity in society. Is that we're like knowledge is. So I remember I'm a big fan of James Burke, who
Sure.
wrote, he wrote and did these wonderful documentaries that used to be on History Channel before they got caught up in UFOs and Masonic conspiracies.
Right.
Called
when it was actually history.
When it was actually history, yeah, it was called Connections, and
We should make a History Channel. By the way, we should make a History Channel called History Channel History. And it would be a history of the History Channel.
The History Channel.
Right. Or we could do that too. Sure.
But yeah, it was if you ever get a chance to see these, they're really amazing. And basically what Burke does, and he's made a career of this. He used to be he was a BBC reporter, and he was like their science reporter. And so when we were landing on the moon, he was their guy reporting, kind of giving the play-by-play. And after that, in the early 1980s, he created these sort of historical documentaries. And basically his point is that nothing happens in a vacuum. It's not like Thomas Edison just like woke up one day and went, aha, light bulbs, everything is built on something else. So sure. The idea of GPS has its roots, way back in Muslim Spain, back before 1492.
Sure.
And so that, that's how far back that thing kind of goes. But I think with when we talk about the idea of intellectualism, I think it's because we live in this world that is very ambiguous, and ambiguity it's scary. It's a scary place and a scary time. And the people who, if you think about like the Luddites, right? These are people who would, in response to the industrialization, they would throw their wooden shoes into the works of the machine to mess the machines up, right? And a wooden shoe in French was sabot. And what they were doing was sabotage, which is where that word comes from. They would literally throw their shoes into the machines, breaking them essentially as a way of protesting against this new sort of industrial life that they were going into, and feeling like they were forced into. And so I guess my question now is, so when the world was industrializing, this is precisely at the time when Masonry comes into the picture. Mm-hmm. Right at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the earliest beginnings. And so my question is what if anything is Masonry's relationship to intellectualism or anti-intellectualism? And what should it be? Because I feel like, maybe this is me, but I feel like there's two Masonries, right? There's a split in Masonry, and this is probably a full show. We could call it like a tale of two Masonries, but there's one Masonry that is sort of aspirational. We talked last week about traditional observance, and
absolutely.
And there's sort of
highly
intellectual, esoteric in its outlook, pursuing knowledge in Masonic education.
Yep.
And then I feel like there's this other Masonry that is sort of like just a bunch of good old boys who are like, stop changing my Masonry. Like, my Masonry is just fine. We've been doing it this way for the last 50 years. We're just, stop messing with things you don't want to mess with. And one group sees Masonry as this sort of international phenomenon, and another group seems to find Masonry as this, club for, almost like a veterans booster club, like a branch of the American Legion, or
right. Yeah.
Right. And it's disturbing. It's disturbing when I see Masons on Facebook, deriding Muslims, not realizing that there are plenty of Muslim brothers, or, You know, when
Sure.
you have Masons deriding people from France, not really realizing we have plenty of French brothers. You know, it's kind of this. There's this sort of disconnect between sort of the international intellectual side of Masonry and the sort of parochial non-intellectual. And I'm making that sound like one is good and one is bad, but they're just two sides of a phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll buy that. I will, and I think that Masonry. I think that its stated purpose, its goals. I don't think you can actually have another conclusion other than that it's a highly intellectual pursuit, and that it is there to inculcate and to impart intellectualism into its members. I honestly can't think of an argument at all the other way. You know, while there are, you know, fraternal aspects to it on its surface, you know,
so if you
no
if
matter
you go
how you
back,
slice it, it's still
yeah,
intellectual, right?
well, maybe. So,
I don't know.
well, so let's go back. Let's go back to
Yeah.
our definition. So Hofstadter definition of
Sure.
intellectual, right? Which is sort of this questioning, this sort of meta, you know, this sort of meta analysis of
Right.
reality, right? So whereas intelligence seeks to grasp, right, intellectualism is, you know, critiquing the critique, you know. And so
Okay.
my question for you is, what evidence do we have in our traditions that suggests that Masonry should be an intellectual pursuit? Because I don't disagree with you, but I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here.
Right. But I mean, I think the whole ritual, right? I mean, like, let's just start there. If you're listening to that ritual, it's telling you, I mean, right there on its face, it's telling you, hey, this is deep. There's lots of things and you need to think about this, and you need to, you know, go over it, because you're not going to learn things on the first time through. And so I think that the ritual right there is your is really the silver bullet to that argument. I'm trying to think of another good example, but really when it's the ritual, I mean, it's the whole thing. And I would love to actually, I could give you a really good example, but it's too deep in the ritual for public consumption. But I mean, there's some stuff. I mean that you just when it's pointed out, you go, oh wow, okay, that's not an accident, and that's really really deep. So there's my answer. My answer is ritual. Right there, ritual. Period. End of story.
Okay, ritual.
Ritual.
All right. So let me ask you
right
this.
there.
Let me ask you
You
this.
know, how much more basic can you get?
Okay.
Right?
All right. Okay. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
And feel free to pull like a Comey and say, well, this wouldn't be appropriate to answer this at this
right.
time, Senator. But right.
Right.
Which of the degrees do you think instructs us to be intellectual?
All of them? Can I say all of them? I mean, literally. I mean, yeah. No.
Really?
No. Absolutely. I think. I mean, it all starts with the EA, right? But they all instruct you to be an intellectual. Every single one of them. I mean, you could make the argument, right, that the most intellectual of them is the fellowcraft degree, because that's, you know, it's deep into arts and sciences, etc. But all of them, every single one, encourages you to be an intellectual.
Okay,
in some way.
I'll accept that, but I think you're wrong. I think here, all right. So here's the thing. So no, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. You're
right.
So I believe that the second degree teaches us to be intelligent, but I think the third degree teaches us to be intellectual.
Okay, I'll buy that. I'll buy that. But I think that the second degree also encourages you to be intellectual for reasons which would be inappropriate to get into right now. But I would give you specific examples in that degree that if you looked at it, you went, oh, right, yeah, that. Yeah, okay, I get it. But I mean, I think the most obvious one, though. I mean, and you're right. The third degree, right, absolutely does. But the first degree, right off the bat, they're telling you, there's more here than meets your eye the first time you see this.
Well, they're getting you set up for it for sure.
They are
for
right,
sure.
Absolutely. They're teeing up the big shot that comes in the third.
Yeah.
And so I mean, it's like any good play, right? The first act sets up everything for the third. So, yeah, all right. I'd love to discuss that more. That's the worst part. I would love to discuss this more.
I know. There's so many times where I wish
right?
X-Oriente were tiled and we could just let it all hang out. But
I know.
Such is the burden of Masonry. Yes,
that's right.
So there's two things. So, one of the there's a guy by the name of and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but John S. Naj, who is a past master, and he is he and I are somehow connected on Facebook. And I have to say, like, when X-Oriente started, there were no such thing as pages on Facebook, and so basically anybody who friended me who I could ascertain was a Mason, I friended back. So I have a lot of friends on Facebook who I don't think I've ever met personally, but I still, they're still friends because of the show. And he's one of these guys. He calls himself a coach. He's like a life coach, and he posts stuff, affirmations and aphorisms and stuff like that. And sometimes they're really interesting. They're really thought provoking. And he posted two things that I thought was really good. One was a blog entry by a guy by the name of Michael Harding, who I'll put all this stuff in the show notes so that you can go read this yourself. But Harding runs a blog called The Harding File, and the subtitle is On Software Development, the Internet, Business Marketing, and Related Ideas. Right? So it's not a Masonic blog, but he's obviously a Mason, and he wrote an article on May 28th about called Adapt or Die on the Decline of Membership in the Masonic Fraternity. And he has some things that, he has sort of a prescription. And it's funny, I read this and I thought to myself, oh, I had this prescription once too, many, many years ago, before I fully understood the complexity of but I guess what I want to do is, if we've established that Masonry is an intellectual pursuit, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read you his prescription, and I want you to tell me: do you think that this supports that, or would it strengthen intellectualism, or would it weaken intellectualism within Masonry?
Okay. All right. Fire away.
All right. Number one: embrace technology. He says, this is a generation that gets news from Facebook and Twitter. They watch Netflix and YouTube instead of television. They don't have a newspaper subscription and have no home phone.
Can I address these point by point, or
yeah? Let me just read you the whole thing and then address it. All right. He says, this is a connected generation that expects information to be available when they want it. They refuse to be tied to a specific place and device to consume knowledge and information. They connect to their social network within minutes of waking and remain connected until minutes before retiring in the evening.
Okay. Yeah, neutral.
Neutral. Okay.
Yeah, totally neutral. I think, yeah, okay, neutral. Neither way. I mean, because social, he's basically just saying, like, be connected and be social and blah, blah, blah. Neutral. That has no bearing on intellectualism.
Okay. So I think that the next one is, he says, improves communications is number 2. We need to connect often and more transparently. This generation is used to getting their news from the internet. They discover new activities. I think this is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, right. I
right?
was just going to say
Okay.
that's repeating itself. Okay. Neutral.
Um, so here's this. All right, now here we go.
Okay. All right.
All right. He said, I once heard a wise past grandmaster say, the problem with young Masons is they're always wanting to do stuff.
Okay.
Today's crop of younger Masons and potential members are more socially active in different ways than generations past. They crave relevance and meaning while staying active and ever changing. We need to find ways to engage new members with their entire families and friends in meaningful activities and bring everyone together as a community, not just a group of men working to bring other men into our never-ending circle of lodge degrees and stated meetings. We need to segment our membership into groups and tailor our vast offerings to those different segments in ways that best suits that group.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So the key there is that last part, right? Segmenting. Oh, man. That to me argues for that feels anti-intellectual, doesn't it? Like, well, we're gonna segment this out so that the eggheads will be over here, and the rest will be over here, and like, no, I don't know. No, I disagree. I disagree with the whole segmented out deal. I mean, it had me until then, but that's what that feels like.
I would agree, and I would say in Harding's defense that when I was a young Mason and I first started out, I would have been completely all over this and be like, yes.
Well, yeah.
In fact, I wrote an article that was published. I can't remember. I think it was published in the Illinois Masonic Magazine, but then it got picked up by the Grand Lodge of Australia, and they republished it. I know, I'm so cool. But it was about marketing in Masonry. It was one of the first things I ever wrote in Masonry because I'm like a marketing guy, and so I basically was saying, well, we need to apply modern marketing techniques to Masonry and
segmenting.
Yeah, and now that I look back on it, I've had much wiser minds influencing me. I don't believe I think that what we need to do is find ways to bring those different groups, whether segmented by age or income or education or whatever, kind of bring them together. Yeah. And so that the the older guys can learn from the younger guys and vice versa, and that the rich guys can learn from the poor guys and vice versa. It's
about bringing people together, not splitting them back apart.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
And then he says, his fourth thing is rethink everything. Right? He says, from our initial contact with a new candidate to their raising, we need to rethink our processes and find new and exciting ways to make the experience of the Masonic initiation more rewarding and meaningful. A newly raised Master Mason should not be left to their own initiative to seek ways to be more involved in the lodge, engaged with the membership, and active in the community. We need to be sure new members, their families, and their friends find our lodges to be not only inviting, but beneficial in their lives, spiritually, intellectually, and socially.
Yeah, I mean, and that right there, right? I mean, he even says it in there, but that absolutely is an argument for intellectualism in lodge. I mean, absolutely. No, that's great, and I agree with that as well.
How do you see that as sort of?
So because all right, so right away, so in that first part of it, you said we have to think about how to do this, right? How to engage them. Well, your key and your giveaway is when someone says, "Hey, we need to think." So that's intellectualism right there, because you're not just using your raw intelligence on it. You have to think. So think gives it away, and then at the end, he actually even says intellectual in his little list at the end there, right? And so. Absolutely, that 100% argues for a more intellectual lodge where we're thinking, we're putting our brain power together to think about how to make the experience better for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
especially new members, right? Because your entrance into that organization is the most important aspect of your interaction with an organization. That it's, again, we've talked about this before, is that first impressions are important, and that's your first impression. First impressions run everything psychologically for human beings. And so, that's what this argues for, right? Is that we think and we do a better job at making that first impression better for our candidates, for our new members.
So we have a couple live comments since
cool.
we are streaming live. James Simmons mentioned that he said you can change the medium, but the message should remain the same.
Yeah, I'll buy that. Yeah, I'll totally buy that. Because I think, and I think James hits it right on the head, right? Because and that's more talking, I think, about the maybe the first point. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, whether it's electronic or if it's on a piece of paper printed out in front of you, it shouldn't matter. The message should be the same. I agree with that. Totally.
And then Abe Metz also said, Brother John Nash is awesome, which I completely agree with.
Right.
So there was another article that he posted by a guy named Lance Kennedy, who's a Texas Mason, and he offered up on June 9th, he offered up 10 propositions for Texas Freemasonry. And it's pretty specific to Texas, but one of the things, so what he did basically was he sort of took the 8, we talked about Andrew Hammer's, like 8 principles for observing Masonry, and he kind of added 2 more.
We still live in a BuzzFeed listicle world,
don't we? Though
it's obnoxious. All right.
It's funny. My nephew does this for a living. He he works for a company that does these things, and I'm trying to get.
Give me the 10 surprising facts about Texas Freemasonry that will change the world.
It's not so much. It's not so much facts about Freemasonry.
Yeah,
I know. He's got his prescription. Number 1 is guard the West Gate. We've talked about that a lot.
We got that. Yeah, that's
2 is
that was in the 8 things.
Yeah, 2 he calls aristocrats of the soul, which basically is a call for people to observe a dress code. Okay,
right.
I get it.
That.
The 3rd is leave the gavel be, which basically is a call to not micromanage from the top.
That's good advice.
Yeah, I think it's good advice.
Yeah.
4, this is where it kind of got interesting.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hey, let's go back to 3 real quick, because I think that argues for intellectualism as well. Because when you quiet the gavel, right, when you're saying, well, listen, let things play out, micromanaging things is not a good way to do it. That fosters an environment for intellectualism to breed, because you're listening to multiple viewpoints. Sometimes those viewpoints you will not agree with. Sometimes it'll be strongly disagree with, right? Mm-hmm. But keeping the idea of resting the gavel forces you to internalize those things. So, intellectualism.
Okay.
Good job, right there on 3. All right.
Okay.
All right, hit us with 4.
4 is academia. He calls for Texas to allow, and I guess I didn't realize that they didn't allow for this, but academic lodges.
Okay.
So he says, firstly, he says such lodges have not only the common affinity found between all Masons, but also the added cement of collegiate pride. And this is, I've known Pete Norman long enough to know that.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. It's a big deal in Texas. This idea of collegiate pride. Not only that, having a Masonic lodge actively involved in university life and in close proximity to the student body creates a conduit for young men to be exposed to Freemasonry and become Masons. He says, firstly, I will address a common objection to the creation of academic lodges in Texas. I have heard it said on numerous occasions that academic lodges will stem the flow of college-age men into nearby blue lodges. My response is simple. This concern is based on a poverty mentality and is not grounded in fact. Lodges surrounding college campuses may attract college students, but their doors are not being broken down by a stampede of students seeking our degrees. I would also mention that the vast majority of college students leave their respective collegiate communities and move elsewhere. Why would traditional lodges want to create Masons that simply move away? Academic lodges are not as concerned with this fact since their broad geographic character is an integral part of their appeal. In short, there are plenty of young men on our college campuses to fill each and every Blue Lodge. However, most Blue Lodges are not tapping into that source.
Correct. I could not agree. As a founder of a academic lodge, yes. Yes.
So what was your experience in doing that? Did you find that the academic lodge and doing that did it raise the intellectualism of Masonry when you?
No. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of, right? Sort of. But I mean, that's a good question. I never thought of it that way.
By the way, he does mention Colonial Lodge in his article.
Yes. Power.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Go brand. Yeah. Hashtag branding. That's fantastic. Good for him. I do want to say something about, because that argument of, listen, why would you want to make Masons that are just going to move away? Is such a crappy argument. And it that shows no intellectualism. Like, you've thought that argument not through at all. Because why go to a university? You're just going to move away from it.
Well,
why have alumni? No, seriously, think about it that way.
You're right, but it's more than that, right?
There's a connection. So there is a deep connection with university students. A lot of them have a very deep connection to their alma mater, and they come back. They do. They come back. They move away. Yeah, they go somewhere else, but they come back a lot, and they're very active and engaged in the university life. And so Freemasonry being a part of that, we end up getting tons of guys that come in for like alumni weekend and things like that. And so, and it's really cool to have a whole bunch of brothers who, we've initiated, passed, and raised. That, I've got one of my best friends in Masonry lives in Tokyo now. I have a guy who just moved back. He is a Panamanian. He went back to Panama. Mm-hmm. But those are guys that will always be Colonial Lodge guys, and they're going to go and they're going to talk about Colonial Lodge. They're going to make Masonry down there better, or over there better, because of their experiences in our lodge. And frankly, that's intellectualism. It's doing something like that. I have no return for that. The Colonial Lodge has no return for any of that, but it makes me feel great that we've made something else better. Mm-hmm. Right? We've planted a little seed somewhere else that's made something better. That's why you do it. You don't do it because, well, how many guys are you getting at a meeting? What does it matter, as long as you're making something better, right?
Well, and the simple fact is that every lodge is going through this, because the average millennial who joins a lodge today is going to change careers 3 times.
Totally, and most people these days move a lot.
They move a lot.
That wasn't the case. I mean, you even go back as recently as the 80s and the 90s, and what was it that most people? I think it was 80% of people will live and die within a 5-mile range. And that's just simply not true anymore. Mm-hmm. It is way more common to have at least 2 home cities in your lifetime, where you really think of yourself as, hey, that's my hometown.
Right.
It's much more common. So, it is what it is.
Yeah. I'm a perfect example of this. I'm a member of 3 lodges in 3 different states.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So Michael Radigan says, from little acorns, giant oaks grow, which I couldn't agree with that more.
Absolutely.
So
that's a fact.
So two other things that he mentions, which I thought was, he talks about, Memento Mori, number 6 in his list,
which for those of you who don't speak Latin is old school for YOLO.
Why, yes, it is.
You're welcome. I can't take credit for that. Actually, that's actually a long story from brother Nicky Samponia, who, God bless that boy's soul, literally heard that from the lips of someone. Someone actually said that to him seriously, and he was like, "Really? Okay, then, great, perfect.
We'll take it. We will take it." So
right.
what he's talking about is this idea that we shouldn't be. I'm just going to paraphrase here. We shouldn't be overly whacked out by like images of, skulls and chambers of reflection and stuff like, right. I think that there's this idea that people can't handle that. So we're not going to allow it, as part of our practice.
Yeah. The penalties of the degrees.
Yeah. Yeah, he says, I do not care what the pearl-clutching ladies at the nearest church think about the craft. Our symbols are our own, and we should embrace the darkness because therein lies light.
Damn, that's good.
That's a nice turn.
That
is intellectualism, my friend, right there.
Damn right it is. That's pretty good. Good for him. When did he publish this?
He just recently, June 9th.
Like June 9th. That was like a couple days ago.
Yeah.
What is that? This is literally 2 days ago. That's Friday.
Yeah.
Hot off the presses.
Abe Metz just threw up a comment on the live stream. He says, "Why have so many GLs frowned upon the use of chambers of reflection?" I think it's because they think that it freaks people out and that it's spooky and it's, it doesn't, here's the thing. If you're a Grand Lodge these days, like you are trying to portray Masonry and as clean cut and as positive a light as possible, and putting someone in a room with a bunch of skulls and salt and sulfur and all chemical symbols on the wall and stuff like that. If I could see, especially in places where you've got a strong anti-Masonic, evangelical bent to those states, where that could be, construed as being like satanic almost,
Sure. Poppycock.
I would agree. I
literally the nicest thing I can say about it.
Well, yeah. I would agree with that. I think that there's ways to do a chamber of reflection today that don't necessarily need to involve a dark candlelit room with a skull in it. But the idea of asking somebody to sit down and reflect upon their life before they go on to take what is to be a life transforming degree, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No.
And so So he says in this, where he talks about metaphysics, this is number 8 on his list. Mm-hmm. He says Masons are a group of men engaged in alchemy. He says social functions are extremely important to what we do. However, if we don't yearn for esoteric knowledge, the sort of knowledge that is only grasped through inference and applied study, we might as well join the Lions Club or the Rotary. And then he goes on to say, the very origin of Freemasonry itself is in education. Whether it be practical education and stone cutting found in the operative craft of Masonry, or the search for inner knowledge and science presented to us by the speculative craft, the foundation of the art is inexorably based in teaching and learning. Without it, there is simply no Freemasonry taking place in a lodge. Therefore, every lodge meeting should offer some amount of Masonic education, be it through the degrees or through the presentations on the various lessons of the craft.
Hot take, yeah. Yes.
Okay, okay.
I don't disagree with it at all. And again, he couldn't be more arguing for our position of, yes, Masonry is an intellectual pursuit. But yeah, absolutely, 100%. I'm totally bought that.
I would go further. I would say,
hot take.
Okay. I would go further. I would say that Masonic education is a good start, but it's a start.
Okay. All right.
I think education in general I think that, if you look at what the second degree does teach us, that the arts and the sciences are inexorably linked to what we do. So there's nothing wrong with discussing those and
Agreed. I totally agreed.
and pursuing those. And so the idea that education should be limited in a lodge to simply Masonic education, I think misses the point.
Well, right, but I think that what he's saying, I don't think he's saying that. I think what he's saying is that at minimum this has to be involved, right? This Masonic education, it has to be there at minimum. Anything else, any other education that you're getting is a bonus. So I don't think he's arguing that should be it and we're done. I think that he says that should be the minimum starting point.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you. So that wasn't that hot of a take.
Okay. All right. So we're coming up on
lukewarm.
We're actually over an hour. So let's
all right.
Let's sum up. Do you have any final thoughts on intellectualism or the lack thereof?
No, I haven't really thought about it. You're all welcome. It's my hot take.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. No, I think that again, intellectualism is not a dirty thing. It can be a difficult thing. It has to be something that you work at, but you ought to try it. Just like any other exercise. I mean, sure, it's going to suck at first, and it's going to be fraught with difficulty. But the more that you practice it, the more that you push yourself forward, the better of a person you are. The more rewards you will reap for yourself. Mm-hmm. And the best part about intellectualism is that it's not practiced in a vacuum. Intellectualism is a pursuit that one undertakes with others. You don't necessarily have to do that by yourself, and that makes it much more tolerable.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to point out that there's nothing to be afraid of with intellectualism. Intellectualism is simply questioning, and there is you can certainly go too far with intellectualism, just as you can go too far with everything. And I think if Masonry teaches us anything, it teaches us to stay on kind of a middle path.
Sure.
To subdue our passions and improve ourselves, and that includes intellectualism. And so we should never be afraid of it, or we should never run away from it or feel like that it is a threat to our institution. I think it enhances our institution. Mm-hmm. And I would urge, the thought that I'll leave this episode with is I would urge brothers, when they're on social media and when you're seeing, when you're going to make a comment about the nature of people, understand that you have a brother that is in that group of people that you're denigrating, right? So you can talk about how, government are horrible people, but I can name you right now many, many brothers who are FBI agents who are who are protecting our country, people in the military who are protecting us, people in government who are working incredibly hard with their hearts to make our country and this world a better place. I can show you Muslims who are fighting for peace. I can show you, Jews who are fighting for ecumenicalism and peace. I can show you, Christians that are fighting the good fight. I mean, in any particular group that you can hold up and say, this group is the problem. I can show you members of that group who are not only not the problem, who are not only the solution, but our brothers. Mm-hmm. And so just keep that in mind before you start to talk about, hey, maybe we should round up all the Muslims, or maybe we should, kick out all the liberals, or maybe we should, whatever. Just understand you have brothers who are subscribing to those points of view. You have brothers who are members of those groups, and they deserve respect.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we wrap up. First of all, if you like what you hear, and I hope you do, first of all, if you don't like what you hear, I want to hear from you. So drop us a line at xoriente@gmail.com and let us know what we're doing wrong. If you like what you hear, drop us a line anyway and tell us what you like. Drop us a line either way. But if you like what you hear and you want to support the show, we would love to have your support. You can become an executive producer at the it's $5 a month. You can go to our Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/X-Oriente, and become an executive producer, and we'll put together a nice little welcome kit for you. And basically our executive producers are our unofficial board of directors. And you can support us that way. You can support us by telling your friends about us. You can support us by tuning in each week. We're going to try to make these as regular as possible. But having said that, for the next couple of weeks, Jason you're going to be like super busy next week. And with what?
And I'll be in Aruba.
Plug it, baby, plug it.
I will be in Aruba, drinking fruity drinks.
Wait, that's next. No, that's the week after.
Well, yeah. Well, it's a Sunday to Sunday thing.
So what's happening next weekend now?
Oh, so next weekend is the Universal Brotherhood celebration put on by the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, where we celebrate our diversity, specifically of cultural diversity within our constituent lodges. So this year we are doing a special little dealio for the 300-year anniversary. So we've got a whole bunch of muckety mucks coming over the pond from London who will be here with us. We're going to do some fun things with them to try and kind of honor them for their 300-year anniversary. So that starts on Friday, gets kicked off. We're going to do a ceremonial tree planting at the National Cathedral, an acacia and an oak.
Cool.
Yeah, which is really great. And we will do that with the UGLE guys, and then they will be doing actually before that we'll do. It's actually a private event because it's actually at the Capitol. But they're going to lay a wreath in front of Brother Winston Churchill's bust in the Capitol Rotunda, which is pretty cool. And then let's see. Then there's a couple of different lodge events on Friday night. Naval Lodge is having a special program, and somebody else is having a special program that I'm forgetting. And I apologize to them, but that's all available on the Grand Lodge DC's website. Go there. grandlodgeofdc.org or dcgrandlodge.org. Sorry. And so that's all happening. One more plug, if I might. For a long time, the Grand Lodge of DC has published a magazine called The Voice of Freemasonry. And when I took over my job at the Grand Lodge, I inherited the magazine as the managing editor. I promptly made one issue and found out that finding content for a magazine is nigh impossible. And while I could publish stuff that isn't either interesting or good, I didn't really have a want to do that. So it just hasn't been published in a while. And so what I've done is I've attempted to make a blog out of it. So I started my own blog last week that you can go and see on at dcgrandlodge.org. And if you click through, you go through Grand Lodge, brings out a little drop-down box, and then you go to Voice of Freemasonry blog. And there you'll have it. There are 3 fresh, exciting articles there, one of which is me explaining what the heck you're looking at and what we're going to do with this blog. But it's been a heck of a lot of fun. And so I encourage you to go to the blog, leave comments, whatever you need to do.
Cool.
That's it. That's all I got.
All right. So just a couple more things. One is that this video thing is kind of new to us. And so the the software that we're using to kind of create all this magic is a little bit complicated. And so last week I made all these like really cool changes, including scrolling credits for our executive producers. And then my computer crashed and I lost those changes. So I have to recreate it. So you're not going to see them on this episode. You'll see them on the next one. I just have to basically rebuild all that stuff. But I do want to thank our executive producers. Without you, this show would not be possible.
Thank you.
And so next week, the plan is that we're going to try to have a guest co-host. If I can line one up, we'll do it. I may do a solo. And then the following week, when Jason is in Aruba, I may also be in Australia. So in that particular instance, we may not be able to do a show. And the reason really is because part of what the support of our executive producers allowed us to do in order to do video is get really awesome gigabit internet in here so that we could stream this live to Facebook and at the same time record it to disk so that we could do both things. And that takes up a lot of bandwidth. So that bandwidth is great, and it's here in our studio in Skokie, but I don't know where I'm going to be. I'm going to be in Australia in a hotel, and who the hell knows what kind of bandwidth we'll have there. So just stick close to the Facebook page.
Interesting fact, Eric, their bandwidth actually goes the other way around.
Really? Does it? Does it?
It does.
Kind
it's
of
the Borealis effect.
Fantastic. So anyway, that's about it for the show. Thank you very much, and take care, and we'll see you very, very soon.
Bye, guys.
Oh.
One more time.